Thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name's Todd O'Hare, and I'm the President and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce. Make sure you turn your phone off so that you don't embarrass yourself if it goes off in the middle of the discussions here this afternoon. I just turned mine off because it was about to embarrass me. But again, I'm the President and CEO of the Montana Chamber of Commerce, and the Montana Chamber of Commerce is the state's largest business advocacy organization. We have over 2,000 members, from sole proprietors to publicly traded companies. Our members include traditional natural resource companies, agriculture, manufacturing, high tech, and everything in between. And so we're thrilled to have you here with us today as leading manufacturers in this state. And the Montana Manufacturing Association is one of those organizations that's underneath the Montana Chamber of Commerce umbrella. I think one of the things that you need to understand or need to know about the Montana Chamber of Commerce is that we're driven by a strategic plan. And our strategic plan was developed by business leaders all over the state, representing all of those business sectors that I just listed off earlier. And it was driven by the need or the desire that we're tired of the Montana economy bumping along the bottom, that we as Montanans deserve a better economy. We're tired of being in that bottom 10 when we're compared to other states. And so what can we do for the Montana economy to bring us from that bottom 10? And business leaders gave us a strategic plan and said, these are the 4 areas that you should focus on. The first one is business climate. And you're going to hear quite a bit about the business climate today. And it's things like tax reform and regulatory reform, tort reform, a legal environment that businesses can operate in and have some predictability. The second piece of it, our second pillar, is infrastructure. And it was recognized that in order for Montana businesses to get their goods and their services, not only in the state but out of the state and into the global market, we need to have a world-class infrastructure. Water, sewer, roads, bridges, and access to high-speed internet. And so infrastructure is our second pillar. Our third pillar, which was identified in 2015 and 2016, was workforce. And it's probably no more prevalent of an issue today than it has ever been, right? You look about the identification of that as a priority by business leaders in 2015 and 2016, that if we're going to grow our economy, we need to have a skilled, trained, appropriately educated workforce. And I always underscore the appropriately educated because we're big believers in the trades and in the skilled trades. We're big believers that every student that graduates high school should be prepared for life, regardless of the path that they choose, whether that's a path that takes them through a 4-year university or a 2-year college or straight into the workforce. And the fourth and final pillar, it was entrepreneurship, because it was recognized that Montana consistently ranks near the top among states as being a top entrepreneurial state. And nobody really knows why. Is it our Western spirit? Is it our independence? Is it our drive to do better? And we figure out sort of side gigs on the side to supplement our income. Nobody really knows, but business leader says, regardless of what caused it, let's not go at it accidentally. Let's not just wake up every year and discover that now we are still on that list of top 10 states for entrepreneurs. Let's go at it with intention. And so I bring all these 4 pillars up as part of our strategic plan because that's the lens that we look at with everything that we do. And I think every one of those pillars aligns almost precisely with those of you that are in the manufacturing industry. A business climate, an infrastructure for your goods and products, a workforce that's skilled and appropriately trained, and you are all entrepreneurs yourselves. And so I'm going to touch real briefly on a couple of things that are really important to us. And so because we're in the middle of a legislative session, we're just barely halfway past the halfway point, Montana Chamber of Commerce has a heavy presence during this legislative session. We rolled into this legislature with 9 bills that the Montana Chamber of Commerce brought forward designed directly to affect and improve the business climate in Montana. And those bills are all largely aimed at tort reform, right? Trying to lower your risk of litigation, lower your cost of litigation if you get into it, and provide some surety for you. And so we've got 9 bills that are pecking away at our legal climate and the tort reform that makes it better for Montanans to do business in Montana. One of them that I think that you would be particularly interested in is that we're at the halfway point with is product liability reform. And we've made the most dramatic changes to the product liability law in the state of Montana since it was enacted. It provides additional assurances to manufacturers to protect them against the risk of litigation, their product being misused, and it also protects the retailers that sell those manufactured goods in Montana. And so that's moving through our process. And the other one that we're going to hear a little bit more about this afternoon is House Bill 212, which is the business equipment tax. And the Montana Chamber of Commerce has been a long-time leader in trying to whittle that business equipment tax down, arguing that businesses that need equipment to produce their goods and services shouldn't also have to pay taxes on that. So we've seen the business equipment tax go from an exemption of $100,000 to $300,000, and now we're seeing it raised to $1 million. And so this has been a big priority for us. We're not done. Our ultimate goal is to see the complete elimination of the Montana business equipment tax. But we're making substantial improvements in that sort of direction because we believe that it's beneficial for Montana businesses, and particularly for those of you that are dependent, especially in this time when we're having trouble finding a workforce and you need to do more in the mechanization and the automation category. So we've got a heavy footprint in this legislative session. Some of our team that works so heavily in the legislature, they're up on the Hill right now working on some of those sort of bills, but we want you to be assured that we've got your interests in mind, and we look through those 4 pillars every single day of the week that we go to work on behalf of Montana businesses. So these sort of events are not cheap or easy to put on, and they wouldn't be possible if we didn't recognize our sponsors that stepped up and have been such great supporters of us to be able to put this on. So I want to acknowledge our sponsors, and I want to make sure that you all thank our sponsors that made this possible. Accelerate Montana is here. Applied Materials. I saw some of the folks from Applied Materials. They got a whole table, I think. Where's Applied Materials at? There, got a whole table right here in the front. Boeing is here. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate your support. Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Railway, the Montana State Fund, Northwestern Energy, First Interstate Bank. We see First Interstate Bank and Northwestern Energy everywhere across the state of Montana supporting the communities. The Media Coalition of Montana, it's a relatively new organization that's promoting media and media manufacturing in the state, content manufacturing for the media industry in the state of Montana. MMEC, Patty Fleming, thank you, Patty, from the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center. New Horizons Studio, you might be more familiar with the name Hyundai. John, where's John? Over here. John, thank you, John. Appreciate all the support that you give and for your decision to move some of Hyundai's operations and research and development to Montana. The MSU Innovation Campus. Mark Sharp is here. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate your support. Ox Workforce Housing. Stockman Bank, which is another one of those banks that seems to be everywhere in the state of Montana. Valley Bank of Helena. And those are all of our platinum sponsors. So can we give them a round of applause and thank them for their support? Two more short categories of sponsors that I want to make sure that we acknowledge. These are in the gold category: Allegiance and Charter, Sterling CRE Advisors, Pacific Source Health Plans, and the Montana Department of Commerce has been a great partner with us on so many things. And finally, our silver sponsors include Montana Hydraulics and Wheelhouse. And so let's thank all of our sponsors for making this sort of an opportunity available to us. Now, as we go through the day here, I want to also introduce the partial team of the Montana Chamber of Commerce so that you can put faces with names, not only if you need something today, or if you leave here today and you have questions about anything to do with the Montana Chamber of Commerce. I want to bring some faces and some names to you so that you can feel free to reach out to them. Candace Strauss is standing at the back of the room. Candace is our Vice President of Marketing and Communications. Peyton Dobbs is sitting right over here. She's our Membership Relations Coordinator. Sheridan Johnson is standing right next to Candace there in the back. Sheridan's really new to the Montana Chamber. She's helping us on our government affairs sort of work up at the Hill, and so I stole her away from Charles Robison, who's up there today, so she can be here. And we've got Diamond D. Durand. Where's Diamond? Right? Come here, Diamond. Almost everybody knows Diamond D. Durand. She's been with the Montana Chamber of Commerce for over 30 years, and she's the glue that keeps us together, so thank you, Dee. And then Stacy Dorrington, who's responsible for all the logistic for putting events together. I want to thank all of them. And then Shane Scanlon, who led a lot of the effort for pulling the speakers and all this together. Can you give all of them a round of applause, because it takes a lot to pull this together. So with that, I would like to turn it over to the president of the Montana Manufacturing Association, Scott Sainert. Scott?
Good afternoon. I'm Scott Sainert. I'm current president of the Montana Manufacturers Association. I'm also vice president with First Security Bank, which is a division of Glacier Bancorp. So thank you all for coming. First, I'd like to thank Todd and the Chamber team for putting together today's event and trade show. As Todd said, this takes a lot of effort, and this team works tirelessly for these events. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, our panelists, our vendors, the moderators, and most important, I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. As the president of the Manufacturing Association, I get the privilege of traveling around the state and seeing all the incredible things that are being done right here in Montana, and some of the global brands that kind of fly under the radar, if you will. But it's really an incredible state to go around and see what's going on. From we have Lance from Montana Silversmiths here today, making belt buckles that are internationally known in the professional rodeo section, and Woods Power Grip, who has glass moving equipment that ships all over the world. So some really cool things, and I know I've missed some folks, but if I listed everybody, I'd be up here all afternoon, and Stacy put me on a very tight chain today. It's really exciting to be in Montana manufacturing, especially here in 2023. The Chamber's been a leading advocate for reducing the business equipment tax, as Todd mentioned, and this is really an important reduction for manufacturers. And this year, thanks to the governor, a supportive legislative session, and leadership from the Chamber, as Todd said, that tax was moved from $300,000 to $1 million. And that's going to take over 5,000 businesses off that tax roll, which is very important. It allows them over time to invest that money in their people, their companies, and grow their economic base. Also some exciting things going on at the Department of Commerce through a reallocation of funds. Recently rolling out a low-interest loan program for automation and robotic equipment purchases. This will allow companies that need to automate some processes to obtain equipment at below market rates and help them grow their companies, and again, invest in their people and provide even better paying jobs than they already do. Montana manufacturing, we continue to be over 20% of the state's economic base, and currently we have over 4,500 manufacturers in the state of Montana. That is a 17% increase from 1 year ago, January 1st, so an incredible growth rate in the number of manufacturers. Manufacturing wages continue to exceed the Montana average wage by over 12%, and it keeps growing. And Montana manufacturing employment and economic growth continues to double the national average. So something to really be proud of as manufacturers. We're also blessed with many resources for our manufacturers. We have Montana Manufacturing Extension Center that is at Montana State University in Bozeman. Patty and his team do an incredible job to assist manufacturers across the state, as well as local and regional Chamber of Commerce and the economic development organizations that are throughout the state. We're also seeing development of regional manufacturing groups, such as the Southwest Montana Manufacturing Partnership that take it in the Bozeman, Butte, out to Big Timber area. We're also seeing a similar group blossom up in the Flathead. And so as we see these groups, we have manufacturers and their people coming together to collaborate and work together on challenges, share best practices, and really make an effort to grow the industry here in the state. Further, as we advance into Industry 4.0, the industrial Internet of Things, automation, robotics, predictive maintenance, Montana manufacturers are going to continue to become more productive, offer even better paying jobs, drive our economic growth, and truly be a center of manufacturing excellence. And we're really getting noticed. Most recently, Montana Manufacturing was featured in a Forbes.com article by our keynote speaker, Jim Vinosky, who we'll hear from here shortly, and also on his podcast, Manufacturing Talks. If you haven't seen the article or the podcast, I would encourage everyone to take a look at it. It's really exciting to see that we as a state are getting recognized with our manufacturing. So as you can see, there is a lot to be excited about. Again, I want to thank everybody for attending today. Take time to, talk to our speakers, visit our vendors, and network tonight at the event. There will be a great opportunity to get to know everybody and see what's going on around the state. So with that, excuse me, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Jim Vinosky. We're really thrilled to have Jim with us today to deliver our keynote address. Jim has spent his entire 3-decade career in manufacturing in products ranging from paints and plastics to food and bourbon. His focus has been in engineering, operations, and management. He's a veteran of companies large and small, including Ralston, Purina, and General Mills. Jim is president of Cosgrove Content, LLC, which provides media services to the industry. Jim is the host of Manufacturing Talks, a web show and podcast featuring valuable business lessons the do-or-die world of manufacturing has to offer. As a contributor for Forbes, Jim has published over 200 articles covering all facets of manufacturing and supply chain. He's explored a variety of topics in his column: the success stories of numerous American manufacturers, the war for talent, the amazing innovations in our advanced technologies such as 3D printing, bioengineering, and artificial intelligence. Jim is an avid cyclist and outdoorsman and is scoutmaster for the troop his 2 teenage sons are in. He lives with them and his wife in Granville, Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Jim Vinosky.
It is great to be back in Montana. I'm from Michigan, as Scott said, and you get to this time of the year, this time of the winter in Michigan, and there's nothing like hopping on a plane and coming somewhere colder and snowier. So yeah, that was a little bit of a downer, but no, it really is great to be back here. I haven't had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in your beautiful state. I have been across it a number of times. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, and my mom grew up in Oregon. And so every other summer, we would travel across the country in a station wagon with a family of 7. So, don't get me wrong, loved crossing your state, loved my family to death. This trip, despite the cold and snow, has been much cushier than that. Okay? So I got back to Montana just last year. Now, I'm going to admit, Montana was not on my radar with all that fancy stuff that Scott covered that I get to talk about and write about and study in my work for Forbes and on my web show. Didn't have Montana on my radar. 2 years ago, though, I had written about the company that Todd mentioned, that John Suh here runs, New Horizon Studios, a crazy little arm of Hyundai that is, well, at the time, they were just designing this ultimate mobility vehicle. So this wheeled vehicle whose wheels turn into legs, and it can go anywhere. And that was really cool, so I wrote about it for Forbes, and then forgot about it for a while, until I got a call last fall from Matt Olson from the Chamber saying, you know, you really ought to come out to Bozeman, because you remember what you wrote about with John Suh? He told me about that, and they're building an R&D center, and they're going to be making these things. And so that was too cool. So yeah, I went to Bozeman last fall, went to their manufacturing days out there, and learned about all that John has going on, which is phenomenal. Learned about how he selected Bozeman with Montana State and Gallatin College and all the skilled young people that can get funneled to his business that way. The terrain that's perfect for testing an ultimate mobility vehicle. And the stuff that Todd just talked about. I learned about all the initiatives that you have going on with the business community, with the schools, with the legislature, with Governor Gianforte to make Montana a more attractive place for manufacturing. And so I got studying that. And like Scott said, I wrote about it for Forbes because it was, I think, a great example for the whole country, what we ought to be doing for manufacturing. Then I had Scott on my show, and now I'm out here to talk about why I think you guys are doing so well. So I'm going to start with a quick quiz. Anyone heard of James J. Hill? Who is he?
Great Northern Railroad.
Yes. Alistair, you're amazing. You know, Alistair, when I was in Bozeman, had a hat that was made in my hometown. I'm sorry, that's not Alistair. Sorry, you guys look alike. Holy cow. Forget about that story, but Alistair did have a hat that was made in my hometown that I used in my speech there. But thank you. Yes, James J. Hill was one of the titans of railroading back in the 19th century when railroads were first crossing the whole country. Now, he was born in Canada and spent most of his life in St. Paul, Minnesota. But he had strong ties to Montana because obviously he's taken a rail line across. It was the Great Northern Railway at the time. It became Burlington Northern. And his company discovered the Marias Pass, which cut 100 miles off their route west, made his railway that much more attractive. And along the way, as they built their railroad, they established a lot of the communities along its route. And so glad to know that he's still known in Montana. Now, don't feel bad if you didn't know who he is, because I didn't either until I came across an article I'll talk about here at the end of my speech. And so what does he have to do with manufacturing in Montana today? Well, I'm going to tell you, because that's why I flew halfway across the country, right? But before I do, let me talk about manufacturing in general. I'll start with the world, okay? Manufacturing in the world is a bit of a mess. So I'm going to refer to some stuff that are things that are tied to the pandemic. I mean, everyone remembers the supply chain nightmares and the difficulty in getting things. But a few things in particular that have currency today are two locations, and one is China. You know, obviously everyone has China on their mind in manufacturing. They've been a tough competitor for a couple of decades. They've grown substantially and taken a lot of our business. But in the pandemic, all of a sudden, you couldn't get stuff from China. And so today they're trying to claw back business that they lost during the pandemic because they failed as suppliers. And, you know, those of you in manufacturing know, you count on your suppliers for your lifeblood. And so when they failed, a lot of people started looking elsewhere. Then they compounded their error, and they tried to contain an airborne virus by shutting whole, hundreds of millions of people at a time, shutting them down and keeping them from doing the work of getting the business back, and that was just in the last few months. I mean, they're just now kind of coming to their senses and realizing the rest of the world's pretty much moved on from this thing, and we're only hurting ourselves. So now they're trying to dig out and trying to get business back. But you've seen people talking about getting out of China. Heck, Foxconn, which I'm not a huge fan of because they took a bunch of government money from Wisconsin next to us and then didn't deliver the goods, but Taiwanese company that's wanting to get out of China, I just read today. That kind of tells you some of the difficulties they have. The other place is Europe in general, but I'm going to focus on Germany. So Germany, heavily industrialized country, right? Phenomenal manufacturers in Germany, and have been for time immemorial. And then Europe as a whole, and Germany in particular, got on the renewable energy bandwagon. Okay, nothing wrong with renewable energy. It is going to be part of the mix to help us cut emissions, which, say what you want about global warming, we're affecting the atmosphere. We probably ought to scale it back smartly, and I'll talk about that in a while. Germany, I don't think, did it smartly. So back at the beginning of the 2000s, under their former Chancellor Angela Merkel, they instituted a program called Energiewende, basically saying transitioning to a whole new energy system, right? So they started shutting down fossil fuel plants, and then after the Fukushima disaster in Japan, they started shutting down their nuclear plants and going whole hog on wind and solar. And prices started going up, and energy reliability started going down. And that's not a good thing in manufacturing, is it? So we look at Germany now, and we've had another thing happen called Ukraine. We've had a related thing happen called Nord Stream. And now Germany is looking not only at people not having energy to heat their homes and run their general businesses, but manufacturers actually pulling out of Germany, one of the most industrialized countries in the world. A 4,000 person BASF plant has already scaled back greatly. The town they're in thinks they're on their way out and that they're the tip of the iceberg. And imagine what that's going to mean for a society that has hung its hat on manufacturing. And so there are lessons to be learned here, right? So the world, it's not going away. Globalization is not going away. And this is International Trade Days for a reason, right? That's a good thing to focus on. But there are things people are doing that we can learn from and strengthen ourselves here in the US. Now, let's talk about the US. Okay, so the US, and I'll go back to the pandemic. What happened? Geez, we get into it and we shut ourselves down, and everyone's worried about their health, and people are getting sick, and we start looking for PPE, and we start looking for respirators. Where do they all come from? China, yeah, where we can't get them. We realize that like 95% of all these medical devices and even pharmaceuticals are coming from China, and we can't get them in this, the terror-stricken days of the early pandemic. And yeah, just a disaster. More generally speaking, supply chain breakdown, right? All these lengthy supply chains, whether it was China or Taiwan or wherever things were coming from, you couldn't get those things either. A couple personal bits, bicycles and pool tables. Why do I bring those up? Because I was buying them. 2 or 3 weeks after lockdown, everyone's looking, okay, what are we doing with ourselves? My wife wanted a new bike. And so we went to the local bike shop, which is normally wall-to-wall bicycles. 7 bicycles in the shop. Now we got lucky because they actually had the very bike she wanted in the size she needed. And needless to say, we snapped that right up. A week later, we went and ordered a pool table. So our boys, my 2 sons, teenagers, the Scouts, would have something to do because Scouts was shut down too. And not as lucky. So this is March 2020. The place we bought it from said, yeah, thanks for your order. you might get it in September. Really? Yeah, that doesn't come from America either. We got it in March 2021. So talk about opportunity. Now think about what companies did around the PPE and everything. American manufacturers were heroes. People who had nothing to do with PPE, nothing to do with respirator parts, launched into business. Some of them were shut down on their own businesses because they weren't essential. Yeah, don't get me started on that. But they made their businesses work by switching over to these other things that people needed. And it was unbelievable, just phenomenal what American manufacturing did back when the pandemic hit us. Some of those other things, we started doing that too. There's a company I wrote about a few years ago called Detroit Bikes, back in my home state. They make city bikes, so cruisers for just hopping around town. And they were acquired or merged with a company called Look Bicycles, high-end racing bicycles. Why did Look Bicycles buy this company in Detroit that was making street cruisers? Because they couldn't get bicycles out of Taiwan, so they're going to make them here. Bicycles haven't been made in America in 20 years, but Detroit Bikes is doing it. There are lots of opportunities like that. Think about all the 3D printing stuff that went on to get some of these respirator parts and things. There's another story out of Michigan where, with some assistance from some of the money that flowed from the federal government, they established a 3D printing network among small manufacturers where they got free 3D printers, people who'd never had 3D printing before, able to use them for their own businesses with the agreement that should we get into an emergency like COVID again, they turn those over. And the beauty of 3D printing is you can have networks that just send out the design for parts, and they can turn the printers on remotely and be making stuff for respirators or PPE. Amazing stuff. Technology and the American will to do is phenomenal. And so, lots of opportunity, and that's where Montana comes in. So, Todd talked about going after that opportunity here in Montana. And it's just amazing what you have going on. Think about the business and school and government work that has already gone on. It's positioned you very well. You've already made some moves that other people can only dream of. And this is a competition. It's always a competition. You know that. We're competing with other countries, but you're competing with other states too. And what are the states that are succeeding nowadays? They're not the ones that are growing their governments. They're the ones that are growing their businesses. Florida and Texas, Tennessee. Not my home state, sadly, where I grew up, where I live now. It's growing its government, and it's going to lose unless it changes its direction. They're turning over $1 billion to a Chinese company to put a Ford-affiliated battery plant in some of our farmland. It's not the way to do it. The way to do it is what Montana is doing. Make the state more appealing to businesses. Clear out some of the log jams, the regulation, the tax burden. I mean, just for workforce alone, if you think about the opportunities for just what Todd said around needing to grow that workforce, needing to have the people who can do those jobs. Everyone in manufacturing today is talking about the need for people. We can't get enough people to fill our jobs, and especially skilled jobs. That's a real challenge. And so when I went out to Bozeman and found that Montana State and Gallatin College were already funneling highly skilled youth into the manufacturing world, into John Suh's business and businesses like that, that's what's going to provide the winners of the future. And that Governor Gianforte and the legislature already clearing some of those roadblocks, and then looking down the road at clearing others. $1 billion, I heard, in individual tax relief. I mean, that's huge. Probably one of the toughest things is just having people come to where you need them. I spent close to half my career with General Mills. I was talking to an old colleague of mine I hadn't talked to in at least a decade, a couple weeks ago. She's in Buffalo, New York, and been there for 20 years. I knew she had a son who's a little older than my older one, So he had to be in college or his college age, and I asked about him. She says, yeah, he's in college. I said, no, where's he going? He's in Montana, at Montana State. He thought that would be a great place to stay, to live, to go to school, and to stay there. And he loves it. He's been there going on 2 years now, loves Montana, loves Bozeman, plans to stay in the area. John, maybe future employee. I'll get you his info. And then Michelle, my friend, who's been in Buffalo forever, says, yeah, and then my husband and I, we're getting kind of close to retirement. So we're thinking about moving to Montana. So, Montana's already blessed with great people. I was talking to, at the event last night, a young filmmaker. She was phenomenal. What an education that was. I have no read on the filmmaking world. And we got talking about her background. She's from Maryland. Moved out here because she thought it would be a cool place, right? And she says, yeah, I've been here about 4 years. And the thing I've noticed coming from out east, went to school in Maryland, got a master's in New York City, and came out here, and people do stuff here. People hunt, and they fish, and they do outdoors things. They don't sit on screens all day. You have doers. What do manufacturers need for employers or for employees? Doers. So you've already got this base of people who know how to do the work. And now you're drawing in other people who want to do the work. So beyond all those business-focused things, you're doing all these right things to take advantage of, first of all, why did Michelle's son want to come here? Because it's beautiful. Have you guys looked at this place? I fly out here and I'm like, holy cow, maybe I need to move here. It's a gorgeous state and you have great people. Everyone is so friendly. You're just positioned extremely well. Now, I'm not going to say everything's perfect, right? So what are the opportunities for Montana? A few things. So you're going after one right now, and that is the additional business incentives, okay? So things aren't perfect. You still have to clear those roadblocks. You have to face that you're going to have higher transportation costs than a lot of the country. I understand housing is a difficulty, and so you've got to make it easier wherever you can for people to come here and make a good living and be happy to stay. And so continuing with that work that Governor Gianforte and the legislature and the business community and the schools have done is huge. The schools is definitely another one. The technical abilities, the skilled trades, engineering. If you think about manufacturing in America, so many people talk about the decline. And it's true to a degree. There's been a substantial decline in manufacturing employment since about 1970. And that's for a lot of reasons. Certainly some of that is because jobs went overseas. We've had whole communities devastated by businesses that pull out and leave and there's no jobs left. We've had whole industries like textiles that have gone overseas. It's like 3% of American what we wear, our clothing, is made in America anymore. But manufacturing output over that same time has been on a steady increase, an increase beating inflation. So to say that manufacturing has been in a decline isn't entirely accurate. Now, how could that be? Well, the answer is we don't have as many jobs because we've automated them, right? And again, you can argue about, robots are bad, they're taking jobs. Yes, they are. But what I would say is the jobs they're taking are the things like what I saw when I first got to this little Yoplait plant, also up in Michigan, where I started with General Mills, where they were still in 1996 having people hand stack little yogurt cartons onto pallets for shipping. They don't do that anymore. Nobody wanted to do that job. And people made a living at it. That job is gone, but what do they have now? They've got a whole bank of robots doing that work. They've got the operators who run those robots. They've got the maintenance people who service those robots on site. But there's a missing piece. There's the people who designed those robots. There's the people who programmed those robots and installed those robots. We don't count them as manufacturing employees. So I would submit that the jobs are changing and moving to maybe another sector. If you look at overall employment, it's not that dismal a picture. But it does mean we've got to refocus what we're doing. And so when we talk about Montana State funneling John Suh, his people, they will be manufacturing employees, but only if they learn the right things and are able to do the right jobs. Not the jobs of the past that were dirty and dangerous and dismal. Those are the future where, people are on computer screens and servicing the electronics. They're not hand stacking the yogurt crates anymore, right? Okay, back to James J. Hill, right? Remember him? Why did I bring him up? So one of the things that really sparked my interest when I got to Bozeman and learned a little more about Hyundai establishing there was why they did it. I mentioned the terrain and the school providing the skilled employees, the affiliation with the school. They're on the innovation campus. But you know what they didn't do? They didn't get a big, huge government payout. They didn't get the $1 billion that this Chinese company is getting from Michigan to maybe establish a battery plant. So if I look at James J. Hill, I'm gonna read some stuff. So there were 5 major rail lines at the time when he was establishing the Great Northern Railway. He was the only one who didn't take government handouts. He was the only one who didn't go bankrupt. So I talked about Foxconn. They went into Wisconsin promising thousands of jobs and taking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars back about 10 years ago. And if you go to Racine, where they were supposed to be, you've got a bunch of streets that were built and a bunch of infrastructure that was put in place and no buildings and no work going on. They didn't deliver the goods. Because you have that kind of handout, you don't have skin in the game. John's got skin in the game. He's going to make that work out in Bozeman. And that's what James J. Hill did. So I learned about him from a guy named Larry Reed. He's the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, which if you're not familiar with it, I recommend you look him up and read their stuff because it's phenomenal. But he wrote about James J. Hill, and he specifically talked about his tie to Montana because Larry Reed also is a board member of the Frontier Institute here in Helena and writes for them. And first of all, from the website, is a historical website of the Great Northern Railway Historical Society, says, throughout his years of creating, encouraging, and directing, Mr. Hill's creed was development of the resources of the region the railway served. He knew the railway could not prosper unless its territory prospered. So when he established those communities, it wasn't for his own purposes. It was, if those communities succeeded, his railway was going to succeed. Not selfless by any means, but also not taking a bunch of money like the other railways did. And the other railways not only went bankrupt, they were busy blowing up each other's lines so that they could get more land grants and more money from the government. While James J. Hill was putting in functional railroad that still operates today. It says, this is from Larry Reed, Hill was unlike Leland Stanford, who used his political connections to get the California legislature to ban competition with his Central Pacific Railroad. Hill was happy to compete without political favors because he knew he could. He offered incentives to people to move west and help him develop the area in exchange for hauling their goods. One of those people was Friedrich Weyerhaeuser. Heard of him? Who built his timber fortune in the Northwest in partnership with Hill's railroad. And so you think about all you guys have going on, and you're doing it right because you're doing it in that way. You're doing it like James J. Hill would have done it. I just learned from my buddy Matt Olson with the Chamber today that, let me find the right page here. There's centers for excellence that have been talked about, and so there's a competition right now, and it's today is the deadline for RFIs for a CHIPS Act allotment for establishing a center for excellence in high tech and chip making. And yeah, that's taking government money for sure, but think about then if you establish that center for excellence here, that is just like James J. Hill did. It's establishing a different kind of community, a community of manufacturing excellence, of technological excellence. Probably heard of a little thing called Silicon Valley, right? So that's one example. That's obviously one that's a little out there for most places, but did you know that, say, Rockford, Illinois is the center for gear making in the US? And Wichita, Kansas is the center for aerospace. And little Alexandria, Minnesota is the center for packaging equipment. And all those places have not just the manufacturers that build those things, they've got a huge infrastructure of supporting companies and supporting schools and supporting businesses. That's how you grow your economy, that's how you grow your state, and that's how you win. So, Montana, be like James J. Hill. I'll take any questions. Anyone? Well, I must have explained things really well. Well, thank you for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to the rest of the day.